Thank you for joining us for our Lift program this evening. This is the second of a series of 3 lessons that deal with our talking to God. In other words, exploring various avenues and aspects of our prayer life. Tonight, I hope you'll enjoy discussing the text that comes from Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 42, as you think about prayer in the difficult days. Jesus is often associated prayer with specific events that were occurring in his life. For instance, in Luke chapter 3 and verse 21, now when all the people were baptized, Jesus also was baptized. And while he was praying, heaven was opened, and the Holy Spirit descended upon him in bodily form like a dove, and a voice came out of heaven saying, "You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased," as he was praying. In Luke chapter 6 and verse 12, now it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer with God. And when day came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. The selection of these 12 was accompanied by a whole night of prayer, I presume, for guidance and wisdom in making the right decision about the right group out of the broader number of disciples, or what it was they were to be commissioned to do, but it was associated with prayer. And so I'm not surprised that as Jesus faces the most difficult hour of his life, the time of his crucifixion, that Jesus desires to spend time in prayer to his Father, and he comes to this familiar place, the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, the text tells us something about what Jesus' heart is feeling at that particular time. Beginning at verse 33, and he took with him Peter and James and John, and he began to be, listen to these words, very distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death." It's hard to miss the impact of the emotional state that he is facing. When were you there? What time in your life can you identify with these feelings of very distressed, troubled, deeply grieved? Maybe you were in an ICU waiting room, awaiting news about a loved one who was in critical condition. Were they going to make it through? What kind of surgery was going to be necessary? Maybe it was when somebody that you had pledged your life to tells you they want a divorce, and you're left in this feeling of emptiness or loneliness that comes. Maybe you were fired from a job and you had those mixed emotions of anger and inadequacy. And all you need to do was to go to God in prayer and pour out your feelings to him. We've all probably been there to some degree, maybe not as deeply as Jesus was on that occasion, but we understand what those feelings were. Why were they there for Jesus? Well, I think it's not only because of the impending nature of his death and knowing what a crucifixion was like physically, what that pain would be, but there's also the recognition that he would be, for a time, bearing the sins of all humanity. Here, the innocent Son of God, who had lived nothing but an unselfish, perfect life, was going to take upon himself all the sins of his generation and the past generations and my generation, and all of our sin. And he was deeply grieved at that process. Now, as you look at Jesus' prayer, it is very clear, isn't it? He expresses it very clearly as what it is that he would like. And he was saying, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but you will." There certainly is clarity. There certainly is passion. We have a parallel text in Luke that tells us that as he was praying, his sweat was so intense that it was like drops of blood falling from his brow down to the ground. So there is passion along with that clarity of what it is that he desires. But it also portrays a heart of unselfishness, doesn't it? Not my will, but your will be done. Maybe the most difficult part of prayer, especially during the difficult days, is when we relent from telling God what it is he needs to do or what he has to do, and are able to simply trust God to do that which is the best. Don't you sense that as you go to the book of Philippians in chapter 4? How is it that Paul can have contentment while he's in a Roman prison? It's because he has learned in whatever state he is to be content, because God was providing in both. God was providing in his poverty. God was providing in his wealth, his health, his sickness. God was always there. And that's the challenge of being able to pray during difficult times. It's to be able to trust not our will, but to truly allow God's will to be done. One other important thing I want to make sure we take note of as we read this text. When Jesus went to pray at Gethsemane, Jesus went to pray by taking his disciples along with him, the 11. And he leaves 8 of them at the entrance into the garden. He takes 3, Peter, James, and John, a bit deeper in with him, and he asks them to watch. He asks them to pray. I think there are 2 reasons for that. One of those is simply that we appreciate having folks around us. There's something that eases some of our burden when we simply know we're not alone, that somebody else is sharing in that time of prayer, that situation with us. But I think secondly, he knew that these disciples needed to be prayerful. They needed to be in contact with God. They didn't need to be focusing on surroundings. They needed to be strengthening their soul. But they slept, and they missed out on that particular benefit. And so when the temptation came, Jesus had said, "Pray that ye enter not into temptation." And when it came, they fled. They ran. John finally shows back up, but for the group, they've left. They missed the opportunity. And so prayer is an opportunity not only for us in our difficult days to find God's strength, it is an opportunity for those of us who are friends surrounding those in their dark days to offer encouragement. I hope as you look at the discussion questions this evening, they will make this text come more alive and more personalized in its application. Again, thank you for sharing in this text.